morning, everyone. We welcome you to IC 82, which is on A to Z of ocular trauma. Being a Sunday, I know most people would have left or would have gone out, but we shall do our best, and we are just going to deal with various segments of the eye. What are the pearls and pitfalls of each, and how do we do carry out management and give us a carry home message for especially comprehensive ophthalmologists. I would request General Pariyar sir to please come on stage. Dr. Gupta sir, please.
लास्ट डे का यही होता है।
I shall be now giving a brief overview of ocular trauma and its classification. Ocular trauma, as we all know, is one of the emergencies that we face often. And as far as the worldwide incidence of ocular trauma is concerned, about 500,000 people in the world are blind as a result of eye injury. 30 to 40% monocular blindness is due to ocular trauma. If you see the United States registry alone, about 2.5 million eye injuries occur annually, with about 50,000 people almost permanently losing part or all of their vision. It's a multimodal peak. The first peak is around 5 to 25, and the second one is at 70 years, and men are at risk almost 4 times higher than women. Spectrum includes all types of injuries, right from ophthalmic trauma, ocular adnexal injuries, lacrimal and orbital injuries, and also cranioorbital and orbitofacial also. In systemic injuries, 13 to 16% of all ocular trauma is encountered, and 83% almost in head injuries. A short note about what is the prevalence in India is around 3.75, higher in rural areas compared to the urban, and same bimodal peak is also seen out here. Firework-related ocular injuries, American Academy of Pediatrics reported that children were involved more often, and 20% of all firework-related injuries are due to trauma. Chemical injuries, recent incidence has increased as per WHO statistics also from nearly 7.7 to 18, it has gone up to nearly 22%, and ocular chemical injuries, you see, are responsible for up to 45% of all occupational ocular injuries. I've just put a brief note on the rising trend, especially in conflicts that we are seeing around us, like terror attacks and wars. One is because almost 15.8% of all medical evacuations during your terror attacks are due to have eye injuries, and weapons have higher fragmentation, more explosive capacity. And just an example, in Somalia in 2019, an IED blast caused nearly ocular injuries around 24.6% of survivors. In wars, just a small this, if you look at the blast injuries, the effect, it's almost up to 90% now when you see all the wars and operations that are being carried out. In the Russia-Ukraine war, the main issue was the delay in evacuation as well as treatment. And in Kyiv, in the main military hospital, they found that ocular trauma constitute nearly 9.4% of total wounded, and penetrating injury was around 54%, and multiple combat injuries around 81.4%. Open globe injuries, in the recent iGate study group, it was 3.5 injuries per lakh, and 80% men and boys at 10 to 30 years, maximum risk. 6:1 is a male is to female, and the prognostic factors are as given in that. And almost to note is 44.8% of visual acuity less than 6/60. Coming to closed globe injuries, Brendan Lee et al. Did a study, and they found that while scanning various registries, 4.4 per lakh, and these are some of the various complications seen, right from hyphema, vitreous hemorrhage to breaks, mainly involved young males. sports and adnexal injuries were more common. Etiology, I have not given most of the figures because most are available. What is important is, as per the WHO, they did a study from 1990 to 2019. The increase has been mainly in motor vehicle injuries, physical assaults, sport-related injuries. Chemical injuries still hold its place, and intraocular foreign bodies have a bigger role to play. Falls in elderly constitute nearly 5% of ocular injuries. So, coming to the next part, the classification for ocular trauma. Why the need? Because it provides a simple, you want a simple, clear definition, and you want definition of various terms. Kun et al. Started in 1996, basic mechanical eye injuries into open and closed globes. Then the ocular trauma classification group by Pierre Massey and et al. 4 separate variables, which were type of injury, grade, pupil, and zone of injury. So they had closed globe, as you can see the types, the grade, the pupil involvement, and the zone, external with the internal anterior segment and the posterior segment. And as far as open globe, rupture, penetrating injuries, intraocular foreign body perforating and mixed, and the zones. Zone 1 is in the cornea, zone 2 is up to 5 millimeters, posterior to limbus, and zone 3 is still posterior to it. The BET or the Birmingham High Trauma terminology is now most often followed. Standard terminology, it gave us the exact definitions for all our features of closed globe, lamellar lacerations, penetrating, perforating, and these are still followed, just a representative sample. But it did not involve periocular injuries, so the modified BET was incorporated to overcome this, where they classified extraocular injuries as with or without retained foreign bodies. The ocular trauma score, again in the early 2000s, proposed by Kun et al. Variables used were the initial vision, rupture, endophthalmitis, perforating injury, RDs, and RAPDs. So you have a score, raw points are there, and the raw score is the sum of all the raw points. So if you add them up, you get your raw score, and higher the raw score, better your prognosis. But pediatric OTS was not reliable with the OTS. So they added 2 more variables, age of onset and the location, and that was more accurate as far as the POTS was concerned. And less than 6 years, there was also a toddler score, which is called the TOTS. This was by Professor Shukla, who had tried to encompass all the various types of injuries, mode of injuries, location into one classification in 2017, which is also followed by the Ocular Trauma Society. But the ocular trauma score per se did not address few things. Adnexal injuries, whether there is a problem with the vision at presentation, whether it is accurate predictor, whether RAPD was accurate predictor for long-term injury. So these were the factors that needed to be looked into. So the IGATES came, the International Globe and Adnexal Trauma Epidemiological Study, done by all these societies, a part of it. And main factors were to identify and influence the outcome of open globe injuries, revise and update the ocular trauma system, conduct a large multi-center review, and to develop a prognostic classification system for trauma. So it is in 3 phases. One is to get the patient information, do a study for baseline presentation variables and prognosticate factors, and further do a prospective longitudinal study. Some of the factors in the early part were done, about 10 registries are given. These were the factors that were significant in open globe, right from initial visual acuity, intraocular foreign body, and they still feel that OTS remains an effective tool in counseling patients. They have also done a few surveys, and they have found that many of the specialists have agreed on the terminologies of the Birmingham eye trauma terminology and the OTS. Thank you for your patience. He has to go to the other room.
Okay, request to I request now Dr. Vineet Ratra to speak on raised IOP in ocular trauma. Yeah, Dr. Vineet. स्टूडेंट्स, हमारे 2 PG स्टूडेंट ही बैठे हैं.
So thank you, Shyam.
हमारे 2
You
PG
made
स्टूडेंट
my
बैठे हैं.
talk much easier to do with that exhaustive uh, talk on classifications, and thank you for inviting me here. What I will be talking about is raised intraocular pressure and ocular trauma. So let's see with this patient who all of us generally get in our OPD. This was a 48-year-old gentleman. He came with a history of a blunt injury with a ball. He had also nasal bleeding and vomiting. He didn't have any systemic illnesses, and his unaided visual acuity was 618 N36 in the right eye and 66 N10 in the left eye. So this was his, he had a lower orbital margin which was not felt. There was crepitus, there was tenderness, there was a restriction in extraocular movements looking upwards. Slit lamp examination showed microcystic edema. There was a hyphema. The pupil was dilated in the right eye. Left eye was normal. Fundus examination you could see hazily, but yes, the disc appeared just okay. The rest of the retinal details were not very clear, and in the left eye it was normal. So an ultrasound was done, which was normal, and since he also had that crepitus of CT orbit was done, which showed emphysema, blowout fracture of the floor and medial wall, but no muscle entrapment. So the provisional diagnosis was a secondary glaucoma following a blunt trauma with a traumatic hyphema. We leave the second 4, 5 and 6 because that's not what I am talking about. But what I am talking about is traumatic glaucoma. So this could develop either like Shyam said, following a blunt or penetrating trauma, and yes, it occurs more commonly in the elderly where they fall, or in young people who play sports or have assaults. Based on the etiologies, how I am going to describe them, I'll describe a few of them for paucity of time. So why does hyphema occur? Hyphema occurs because of the anterior-posterior compression of the globe and an equatorial expansion. This leads to tearing of the blood vessels of the ciliary body and stromal iris. Another etiology is that because of a sudden rise in intraocular pressure because of the trauma, the fragile vessels of the iris or ciliary body can tear, and these cause the presence of hyphema is because of a blockage of the trabecular meshwork. It's more in patients with the sickle cell trait, so you need to just confirm with them, though not very common in India. So when you look at the patient, you need to measure and see how big the hyphema is. You need to measure it from the inferior corneal limbus. You need to look at the color, whether it's red or black. Red is fresh. If it is black, it is generally called the black ball or 8-ball hyphema. It means the aqueous circulation is impaired and there is decreased oxygen concentration. So what complications can occur with hyphema? You can get a corneal blood stain, and this is more when the hyphema is of a longer duration and of an increased height. It's more commonly seen in patients who have a corneal endothelial dysfunction or an increased intraocular pressure which was more than 25 millimeters of mercury for 16 days, 6 days. There is an injury of Descemet's membrane can also cause corneal blood staining, and rebleeding is a risk factor. What is rebleeding? Rebleeding is when the initial clot closing the torn blood vessel retracts and undergoes lysis, the bleeding occurs. It generally is more severe than the initial bleed and can lead to complications like corneal staining. It occurs within the first 5 days of surgery, and that's the reason why you need to avoid gonio and hyphema patients in the first week. The risk factor for this is an hypotonia or elevated intraocular pressure, systemic hypertension, and anticoagulant use. So, well, how do you manage a hyphema? You need to tell the patient to raise the head end of the bed, keep the head end elevated, so when they are sleeping, give steroids. This is to reduce the inflammation. You could start with topical and then move on to systemic. Relieve the ciliary spasm by giving cycloplegics. Reduce intraocular pressure with aqueous suppressants. Start off with aqueous suppressants. If the pressures are not low enough, you need to give systemic carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, because again, in patients with the sickle cell trait, it can increase the sickling tendency. So surgical management is when your intraocular pressure is uncontrolled, more than 50 for 5 days, 35 for 7 days. You're getting any corneal blood staining, 8-ball total hyphema, then you need to go inside, wash the blood off. You can use a vitrectomy instrument, then it's a smaller opening. And if the pressures are very high, to tide over the acute phase, you can think of a trabeculectomy. Well, what are the other causes of an early onset glaucoma? They could be because of a trabecular meshwork disruption. This can be seen on gonio. When this heals, it causes a scarring and damage of the outflow apparatus. The next is traumatic iritis, which can cause. How does this occur? When you have a blunt injury, there is death and necrosis of the cells. This triggers an inflammatory reaction, causing a breakdown of the blood aqueous barrier, causes the influx of the WBCs and inflammatory mediators, which causes an increase in intraocular pressure. In very severe traumas, you can end up with choroidal hemorrhage, and choroidal hemorrhage can cause a forward displacement of the lens iris diaphragm, leading to angle closure. Well, what about the late onset glaucoma pathophysiology? The most common is angle recession, but this is generally in patients who are genetically predisposed. How does this occur? When you have a blunt trauma, the aqueous pushes laterally and posteriorly. The lateral push causes a traction on the iris root and causes a tear between the longitudinal and ciliary body muscle. This also causes a collapse of the Schlemm's canal and fibrosis of the trabecular meshwork, causing increased intraocular pressure. The other theory is that there is a growth of hyaline membrane over the trabecular meshwork. Management is like any primary open angle glaucoma, but these are more resilient to treatment. So you start with aqueous suppressants. You can give prostaglandins. These would help because there is an increased outflow through the uveoscleral pathway. But you would reduce the, you would not want to use pilocarpine because trabecular meshwork outflow is as such not working, and pilocarpine also reduces uveoscleral flow. In some people have advocated that in patients who are resilient to treatment, you can try atropine, cycloplegics, that can help reduce the intraocular pressure. There is no role of laser, and one can use the other option once pressures are uncontrolled is to do a trabeculectomy or a tube. The next is a ghost cell glaucoma. This occurs when there is vitreous hemorrhage. The RBCs denature, they form ghost cells, and when the anterior hyaloid ruptures, they accumulate in the anterior chamber. They obstruct the aqueous outflow and increase the intraocular pressure. So this is what they look like. If you have a rebleed, you can get a candy stripe appearance, and the management of this is to clear the vitreous hemorrhage off. That is the definitive treatment. Medical has less role, but you may need to give oral carbonic anhydrase inhibitors. But if the pressures don't come under control, one would need to do a trabeculectomy or a tube glaucoma drainage device. The lens induced, this can occur because of dislocation, which can cause the vitreous to prolapse in front, cause a sort of a pupillary block, or if it is subluxated and just vitreous coming in front, it can block the trabecular meshwork and cause glaucomas. If the anterior capsule is punctured, it can lead to a phacolytic type of glaucoma where you need to do a cataract extraction and put in an intraocular lens. The secondary to penetrating injury, the more you can get synechial, but I'll deal with just the epithelial downgrowth. Over here, the stratified epithelium from the cornea or conjunctiva, they start migrating through the wound. They form a sheet over the trabecular meshwork. They can occur any time from 3 months to 10 years, and the glaucoma is because of blockage of the trabecular meshwork. Over here, glaucoma drainage devices are the mainstay, and you would need to devitalize the epithelium using cryotherapy. Medical therapy, TRAB, and generally don't work. The last is a cycloablative procedure. Well, we had this young girl who was playing outside her house, uh, and there was a stone which was there on the road. A car went past, that stone came and hit her, and this is the sort of injury she had. We took her up in the night, it took us 2 hours, and all her ocular contents were nearly out. The initial call which I got was that it's just soft, we are doing FT, we can't see, there is a total hyphema. A detailed history is important. You need to do a visual acuity assessment, inspect the eye, see for RAPD, very, very important. Try to do a torchlight, if not a slit lamp examination. In an open globe, no gonioscopy, do a fundus evaluation. But most important, protect the eye and educate on eye safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vineet. A very exhaustive presentation and a very informative one. Just wanted to know, when do you advise a trap in acute setting?
Acute settings is when your intraocular pressures do not come under control based on your, even after giving maximum medical therapy, and you start seeing disc changes. So once you start seeing disc changes, you would need to think of a trabeculectomy. In the earliest, if you do it in the earlier stage, because of the inflammation, the traps would tend to fail. So you have to find that golden period when you would, the inflammation is reduced, but pressure is still high, and then go in.
And antibiotics you would prefer
Yes,
to use?
mitomycin, and over here you would want to use 0.4 rather than 0.2.
Thank you, Dr. Vineet.
Thanks.
Thank you. Now call upon General Parhyar to give us talk on principles of wound repair as well as anterior segment injuries. General Parhyar needs no introduction. He is well known to all of us, and he's been a prolific surgeon and a teacher of teachers. So we look forward to hearing him talk to us about these.
दूसरा वाला वुंड रिपेयर वाला
ये दोनों वही है
गुड मॉर्निंग in fact my job has been made simple by Dr. Shyam Sundar and Dr. Vineet. Corneal lacerations vary in size and shape, can be partial to the full thickness, and range from a simple linear pattern to a complex satellite stellate formations. All lacerations require repair as early as possible, preferably within 24 hours. The goal of any repair is a watertight closure, restoration of normal anatomy, and limiting the amount of post-operative corneal scarring and astigmatism. But so many factors are involved to achieve this. In most of the cases when the injury is extensive or engaging into the pupillary plane optical zone, then obviously a long-term management is very much required. For the diagnosis part, Dr. Ratna has already mentioned about how to go ahead with the slit lamp examinations and other aspects of it, so I need not to repeat it. And obviously the pattern of injury will be fluctuating. A small injury with a hyphema can also give the decreased vision, and a major blow to the posterior pole may not help the reduce the vision immediately, but later on with the macular edema it has come. So the ocular trauma, which looks very small, can be a larger one. A small tear can be extended into the subconjunctival space and going up to the sclera. So proper examination is very, very important, and as it is highlighted, the repair should occur urgently to reduce the risk of infection, tissue necrosis, peripheral anterior synechial formation, and alleviate the patient discomfort. Here is very, very important, when you plan repair, you should know your own infrastructure and setup, whether it can be done in your setup or not. If you are expecting that it needs a bigger setup, then it is better to do the immediate to transfer to the place where it can be provided an excellent support. If it is to be delayed because of some reasons, then the primary repair can be done in the anterior segment. So these are the steps. It is not for the ophthalmologist in the larger institutions, but those who are in the periphery, or even for the general practitioners that cover the injured eye with a rigid eye shape. Very, very important, and not to handle or try, if there is a small foreign body which is trapped in the wound, and not to try and pull it up, because you never know how much is the extent and all. Control pain and nausea with analgesics and antiemetics, patient to refrain from eating, drinking, so because you are preparing for the GA. And remember one thing, for any foreign corneal injuries which is likely to have the posterior segment involvement, it is always better to look for any intraocular engagement of foreign body, and do not perform intraocular pressure if a full thickness laceration is there or suspected. If unsure the laceration is full thickness, perform a Siddle test to confirm it. Depending upon the lacerations, whether it can be under a local and all, it is always better if the injury extent is more, to prepare the patient under the general examination. How to go ahead with whether it is a partial full thickness. So the carefully debride partial thickness lacerations. After debridement, use a contact lens or fibrin glue to help it to heal and treat similar to a corneal abrasion. If it is a full thickness corneal lacerations less than 2 mm, cyanoacrylate or fibrin glue can be used, amniotic membrane or any to bridge the gap with bandage contact lens. However, a watertight closure cannot be completed. Suturing is required. Full thickness corneal lacerations are greater than 2 mm definitely needs suture and should be repaired in the operation. Suturing techniques is basically to seal the wound as well as to minimize the astigmatism. So remember one thing, that you have to maintain the contour of the cornea, and if you have that in your mind, the topography of cornea, and accordingly to maintain the contour in the central, the suture should not be too big, and gradually in the periphery it may be the larger. So this you can customize accordingly. Two superficial sutures will give the posterior separation, and if you have gone more than 90% of the stroma, it means the 3/4 of the corneal thickness, then you are hitting to the descemet and endothelium, and subsequent you may end up in a corneal decompensation or the secondary glaucoma due to the mid-peripheral synechias are coming. So adequate around stromal thickness of around 90% is good enough to maintain the good integrity and prevent the subsequent astigmatism and excessive scarring. This is a small video clip. Here this is engaging into the partly to the optical zone. So obviously once it is healing, and initially when you give the suture, it should not be very close by to the lips of the wound, because there is a edema. Because of the laceration, the fluid is accumulated, and if you are taking the small bites less than 0.5 mm on either side of the corneal lip, probably these sutures may give away when the edema is subsided. Suture should not be too loose or too tight. If you have made a too loose sutures, then obviously when the edema subsides, they become further loose, and infiltration, vascularization and all complications may take place. If it is too tight, then it gives excessive scarring. So you have to optimize, and every time when you are giving the sutures, ensure that the depth of the anterior chamber is maintained either with the viscoelastic substances or with the air or any other tamponade. Knot should be buried. It is ideal to bury a knot simultaneously, and sometimes you find that sutures initially you have given are not fitting into the proper way, so you may remove the suture. If it is wound is extensive, then you can give the two central stay suture, and on either side of the extremes of the lip with stay suture. Later on you replace them. So sometimes you need to give more suture in these cases. Tissue prolapse is a big, you may find in the cases, and following the earlier used to be the dictum that where is the tissue prolapse is there, it has to be applied because of the possibilities of infection, or entrapped tissue into the corneal lip may lead to the sympathetic ophthalmitis. But the excision of tissue is not a first choice in the modern ophthalmology, because with the advent of better steroids and antibiotics, these problems are definitely much less seen as compared to the seen 30, 40 years ago. It is always how to go ahead with it. One step is that you have to create a small paracentesis from the other side of the bone and inject the viscoelastic. Second, in the lip itself, to separate the bone margins, use the pilocarpine and gently push it inside, then give the stress sutures and gradually you can reform the cancer. These are the general guidelines for the oblique laceration. Suture will be an equal distance, that as I have mentioned. All corneal sutures, whether it is a corneal transplant or in the repair, it has to be equidistant, but here it is equidistant but not the equi-length. This length will be varying according to the position. The central suture is small, peripheral sutures will be definitely larger in the sense. And the gapping lacerations, the place the initial sutures at the end, as I have told you, and then assist gradually in this. This is a very extensive injury. And the second case you are seeing it here is this is the post-RK one. This one is the post-RK, 30 years ago, and had an injury 8 months before, and it is a massive disease. Here you see that both the end of the cornea, because otherwise what happens, the cornea becomes ragged and the Z pattern. So that the first sutures are given at the limbus on the both the sides, and then subsequently you give remaining suture. It is basically to maintain the integrity. This kind of eye, how much vision gain they will get it, it is all the time will say, but the first hour is that we should realize that we are not the best surgeon. There are so many better surgeons than you are available. So the evisceration or the enucleation should be the last resort in all these cases. Primary repair is very, very important. Whatever may be the outcome, the second surgeon has a chance, and simultaneously the injury which has given the psychological trauma to the patient and the family, that also will, with the time that those trauma is also being taken care of. So do the exact repair. Tissue loss is when the patch graft can be taken up. Once the corneal laceration repair is complete, ensure that there is no leakage, and combination of intracameral subconjunctival injections, intravena, all these are better. Antibiotic cover should be given. These are the list of the complications which may take place in any improper surgery, particularly the road traffic accident, contamination, all those are possible. So this is my first talk. Next presentation. You will find some slides there will be overlapping even in my presentation. I still do, because when you make it a consolidated one, and according to you have to customize and see it here. This is one of the most important cause of unilateral visual loss worldwide, especially in young people. Road traffic accidents and industrial occupational injuries are the most common affair, domestic also. These are the data, the exact details are not available. 2.5 million eye injuries in US per year. Of these, 73% are male, and global, exact global and Indian data are not available. In general, IOPD, 10% to 27% of all eye patients may have the injuries, maybe from a small foreign body to the larger. It looks little larger figure, but if you go through by this, it is there. And in ocular emergencies, other than glaucoma and the CRA, probably this is the topmost of the any eye injury comes to as an emergency. And of all injuries, 90% are preventable. This is very, very important. Management is more difficult rather than it is easy to prevent it. And the safety measures in the domestic, occupational, environmental, road traffic, schools, and other service-related military duties, etc., the preventable aspects are very, very important. Dr. Vineet has talked about the glaucoma. So these are the 7 rings of the anterior segment trauma, where the tissues or the structures are involved, whether it is the iris, sphincter, tear, iridodialysis, angle recession, cyclodialysis, trabecular meshwork tears, gonadal dialysis, and traumatic cataract. So these are the things which you may see that affected, and immediate management required probably whenever there is a traumatic cataract which or the exposed wound, rest all needs a long-term management. Assessment, as we have already discussed, I don't need not to go in detail. This is a NSV commando who had a grenade blast injury with left examination. These are the basic principles of examining any emergency case which is applicable to a small trauma to the major trauma or any other ocular patient. And detailed examination, if you can get it done visible on slit lamp, if there is a obscure like in the low, here is a traumatic cataract with corneal laceration, the posterior segment evaluation by the B scan, if it is possible, if the wound is not exposed, should be carried out. If it is exposed, then the CT should be done. MRI is debatable because the foreign body, you don't know the nature of the foreign body. So plain X-ray followed by the CT has to be carried out. Wherever you have access and possibilities, you can use any other investigative equipment. Assessment, the suspicion of scleral tear is most important. It looks very small limbal injury, and you see there is a subconjunctival hemorrhage, and later on you find that there is a extensive subconjunctival scleral tear is going on, the ciliary body is collapsed there. These are, we have seen those cases, and here is the gonioscopy, the delayed assessment of the glaucoma. As last talk there was on the angle recession glaucoma. All angle recession glaucoma do not require surgical intervention. In fact, initially the patient rise is not because of angle recession. It is because of the hyphema and the entrapped hemolytic RBCs in the trabecular meshwork. So if you can give time, to control the pressure medically, maybe for 3 months or 4 months, probably the most of the cases will not require surgery. That I have seen. Earlier, if any patient coming with the 50 pressure, not responding for 7 days, I used to go for the AGU. Then I realized that it is not required. Later on, some cases, patient was 36, 40, and angle recession was almost 120. I did not operate it. He is a cricket player, and we managed it with the medication. Now it is 5 years, and he is without medication and absolutely fine. So proper assessment when to intervene surgically. About trabeculectomy, since it was already discussed, but if the angle recession is less than 90 degree, then trab pressure is not controlled, can go. Any angle recession 180 degree and above, probably the trab will not be functioning, in addition to the conjunctival stresses and all those issues are there. There is in pediatric cases or in cases you may find there are the multiple injuries, polytrauma, not only the polyocular trauma, the polytrauma. So the detailed examination of the other part of the body is equally required, and in the trauma cases it is a joint effort. That you must remember. That particularly grenade blast injuries or road traffic injuries, etc. In some cases the patient in ICU and the eye examination is the last, first the life-saving systems are being taken care of. Why should you perform the stepwise management? This is the same patient of the RK injuries. Initially we did, it was the lens was prolapsed, iris was, so we had removed the lens, and this corneal suture was put by me and removed the lens. Then the anterior vitrectomy was done and it was left aphakic. And after 6 months of the surgery, then the sterile fixated IOL was performed in this case. So the stepwise management is always beneficial. Eye is inflamed, post-operative inflammation can be devastating in the major surgery. Fresh bleeding can also detail. Corneal lacerations and edema can limit the visualization. Integrity of globe is lost structure, not in their usual anatomical place. Once integrity is restored, carry out better assessment and do the secondary procedure. So these are the different stepwise management. Repair corneal and scleral lacerations, remove blood in AC, aspirate ruptured lens, iris effusion, reposition. Then the next stage comes the cataract surgery if this is not possible to do in the past. So you have to weigh every case. In which case you will go with linear small corneal tear. With traumatic cataract, you will do the repair of the corneal tear and take up the cataract also. And when you are dealing with the cataract, traumatic cataract, it looks very simple before surgery. But during surgery, it is a Pandora box. You don't know what is behind it. So be prepared for the posterior segment surgery to take over, because there may be the rupture of the posterior capsule, linear rupture, or which has during the procedure it has created. In young patients, it's a cortical matter, it is aspiration possible. With the elderly patient has injury, probably the lens when you are handling may go into the vitreous. So dealing with the traumatic cataract, a word about the CTR used in the cataract cases and other. I personally feel that if the zonulolysis is more than 120 degree, and particularly if it is engaging the inferotemporal quadrant, it is better not to attempt any CTR etc. and plan on the scleral fixated IOL, because in long run these all cases, those who have been given capsular support, after 5 years or 10 years, we have seen that some cases do develop the subluxation of the entire bag. Lens is not subluxated, the bag itself is subluxated. So you have to decide in which case you will go with the CTR, in which case it is the preferred choice is the scleral fixated as a primary sitting or as a secondary sitting. This talk is, I think, 11 minutes.
So right. Yeah.
So stepwise management is very, very important. This is angle recession having the tube post-op. This is a post-keratoplasty. This keratoplasty I did it in under the guidance of Professor Gupta in SMC way back in 2002. These are traumatic cataracts. Here you see iridodialysis, and here repair of the iris. It had a glaucoma also. So I put a plate, I did the repair, I removed the cataract. But when I was removing cataract, I found the posterior capsule integrity was totally disturbed. The lens had gone inside, and the VR surgeon took over, and then we removed the lens, and in the second sitting, the scleral fixated IOL was taken in this case. So challenging managing traumatic cataract, I have already mentioned. These are pre-operative challenge is the calculation of IOL part, and here since the traumatized eye, so you have no option except to assume with the available data that the bull's eye had a same kind of a refraction. There was not a anisometropia. In some cases it happened. So you must ask that don't go with the simple, the IOL power of the other eye is coming same, so you put a lens also same power of the lens in this eye. Because there is a good number of cases I have seen, those in the one eye is having high myopia, other is normal and vice versa. So little bit history teaching about this, and that assuming if it is more or less same, then we go with the presumed IOL power. If there is a corneal injury, astigmatism, you are expecting corneal transplant to be carried out in future. So it is, then in those cases, it is better to do the repair, remove the lens, not to put the IOL, and once it is healed, then you plan as a secondary IOL and corneal transplant in a same single sitting. So then probably you will get a better presumed IOL power. This is a small, not a professional player, but this is a shuttlecock injury, and it clearly shows what do you get after removing it, because the anterior capsule is ruptured. He was I think he is now 28 years or so in injury. He was 24 years. Since this tear is away from the optical zone, I expected a good visual outcome. Around -1 cylinder, he is having 6-9 vision. Some nebular opacities are engaging in the central part. Worrying not. So compartmentalization of injuries is not possible. You have to evaluate any case as a total eye examination and management. few more seconds now taking. Now see what happens once you start removing, aspirating, since you are a young traumatic cataract, early patient. And when I remove, I could see there is a linear posterior capsularity. I could assess it. So removing subsequent matter you have to be very careful. But luckily there was no vitreous disturbance in this case. You can see the linear risk. So obviously in this case I don't like to put a CTR ring also. It is because ultimately the long-term results are very, very important. So 3-piece IOL was used in this case. It would have been large or the vitreous would have been coming, then I would have not gone with a 3-piece IOL in the sulcus, but would have preferred to go for the scleral fixated IOL. Because you are doing the management for whole life of the patient. Young patient 25, you are not happy that to present in conference that it was a more than 180 degree of zonulysis and I put the CTR large sphere and I put the lens multifocal. No. See what is going to happen after 5 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for an excellent talk and excellent videos. I'll call upon Beda Baranwal to now talk about orbit and adnexal injuries. Beda Baranwal is a consultant who has retired from the armed forces and is practicing at Lucknow now. He has been posted at Srinagar and has a lot of experience in managing ocular trauma cases.
First of all, I must thank Brigadier Shyamsundar for giving me an opportunity to talk in front of you. So my topic is orbital and adnexal injuries. As the man has advanced, evolved from the earlier age to this age, the mode of ocular injuries have also changed from the stones to fighting to sports injuries to burns, and the present age, the trauma because of the war and proxy war injuries. Orbital and adnexal injuries are not uncommon. They are common in war, proxy war, road traffic accidents, sports-related injuries, and often they are associated with multiple injuries in other parts of body also. And because of that, sometimes the patient is unconscious or has severe injuries on the other parts of the body. The complete evaluation may not be possible. Ocular protection by protective helmets and goggles is of utmost importance, and we share our experience of managing 164 orbital injury cases during last 25 years, which includes war or proxy war cases during the Kargil war in 1999-2000, our experience at Democratic Republic of Congo in Africa in 2008-2009, and at Udhampur in 2013-2016. Bow and arrow injuries, we don't expect these things nowadays, and see, I got a patient in Congo. This was the bow and arrow injury, and see, total eyeball and the orbit. Obviously, nothing is left in the eye. You can't save it. But these are not uncommon. Similarly, during the wars and the proxy wars, because of the splinters, artillery, you can have multiple foreign bodies inside the eyeball, in the orbit, and other parts of the body. See the number of foreign bodies you can see. These may disorganize the eyeball in addition to lodging in other parts of the orbit and the body. Another case is disorganization of the eyeball because of the orbital foreign bodies. Few more cases. These are not uncommon. And for the scientific management of orbital injuries, the best and the minimum thing which is required is a CT scan. It not only localizes the foreign body but also gives the track how the foreign body has entered the eyeball or has reached or lodged into the brain. sometimes the patient is fortunate and we are also fortunate, like in this case, a large foreign body is lying, but luckily the eyeball is intact. Foreign body is located in the posterior part of the, just lying outside the sclera. Obviously, removal is much more difficult than leaving it there, because most of the foreign bodies, artery cells, they are inert and sterile, and removal may be difficult and more damaging to the eyeball rather than the person is seeing that. This was a young Sajad, 21 years old Sajad soldier. During the Kargil war, he came. He said that he is not seeing. In fact, he was told that he is a makra. He doesn't want to work and he is scared of the war. But he was not seeing. And we did an X-ray. We saw a foreign body lying in the apex of the orbit. And to our surprise, the optic nerve was transected by the splinter. Eyeball was absolutely fine except for the relative afferent pupillary defect. Eyeball was perfect, but you can't help it. Once the optic nerve is cut, nothing can be done. Similarly, one case he came with bile-temporal hemanopia, and you can see the track of the foreign body and the optic chiasma has been damaged because of this splinter in the foreign body. But this was a very strange case. This case came during the Kargil war, and because a large number of casualties were there on that day, CT scan of this patient was not that priority. He had injured eyeball, other parts were working perfectly all right. He didn't get a priority for the CT scan. We took an X-ray, and based on the X-ray we took the patient for evisceration. To our surprise, the foreign body which was being seen on the X-ray, we could not localize and remove during the evisceration. Then we took him for a CT scan. We showed that the foreign body was partly intracranial and partly intraorbital. And we removed it with the help of neurosurgeon. In fact, the neurosurgeon said that if I could have removed during the evisceration process, then patient might have died because of the coning. So sometimes we are lucky, the Almighty is lucky, He saves the patient. All these things happen. This is a case where the medial rectus muscle has been damaged, and you can see the splinter damaging the medial rectus muscle. Lids and adnexion injuries are quite common. They may be associated with other parts of the injuries. The center one is a injury because of the deer bite. And management of orbital foreign bodies, and is a comprehensive initial assessment is required, because as I told you earlier, it may be associated with that injury in the other parts of the body, maybe abdomen, head, legs and all those. And the team has to work and first evaluate the patient, and based on the evaluation, an integrated treatment plan has to be made, because this helps to decrease the total number of surgeries. Otherwise, once you have to operate, then surgeon has to operate, then reconstructive surgeon will come into place, then maxillofacial surgeon. Best is a total team evaluation, because it helps to reduce the total number of surgeries, better resource utilization and better results. The basic principles of managing orbital foreign bodies are multidisciplinary approach, and first and the foremost, as Jan Pariyar also told, first is sterilization of the patient for any life-threatening conditions, and patient has to be hemodynamically stable before we proceed on to the management of the orbital or the eye injury. Then for the scientific management, CT scan is required. Then medical management, the standard of CT, antibiotics and pain management. Then surgical intervention, the globe repairs have to be done immediately. Orbital fractures and other things we will discuss in the subsequent slides. Then follow-up and complication management in form of infection control, visual rehabilitation, especially for the people who are permanently visually handicapped. The visual rehabilitation is important. Last but not the least is the psychological support. A person losing a leg or eye and all those needs a psychological assessment and support is required. Ocular adnexal injuries, when and who should intervene? With the coming in of oculoplastic surgeons and the reconstructive surgeons, intervention by oculoplastic surgeon may be required. The eyelid injuries, which can be dealt by general ophthalmologist who doesn't have much exposure to the oculoplastic injury. The eyelid defects not involving the eyelid margin. Then superficial eyelid lacerations involving just the skin on the orbicularis muscle. Partial thickness lid lacerations and the full thickness lid lacerations less than 25% of the total lid. They can be managed by a general ophthalmologist. But if the eyelid laceration is within the 6 to 8 millimeters of medial canthus or involving medial and lateral canthus or associated with ptosis or there is a damage to the lacrimal duct or lacrimal sac, any injury which is involving the LPS muscle or the tarsal plate, or if the full thickness defect is more than 25%, then help of an oculoplastic surgeon should be taken. Canalicular injuries in particular needs to be managed by an oculoplastic surgeon because management by stents improves the cosmetic as well as the functional results and it prevents damage to the canalicula. Orbital fractures, they need support, we need support for the management by the oculoplastic or maxillofacial surgeons, whichever is available and confident. We have seen different types of fractures. This is the lateral orbital wall fracture. This is lateral and inferior orbital wall fracture. Lateral orbital wall fracture. Superior, medial and inferior orbital wall fracture. All types of fractures can occur. And these are managed by titanium plates. Now other types of plates are also available which can be used. The surgical management of orbital fracture, 3 basic guidelines are there when one should intervene. If there is a diplopia with positive FDT post-junction test, one needs to intervene, or if the anophthalmos is more than 2 millimeters, or if there is a large fracture involving more than 50% of the orbital floor. Immediate intervention for the orbital fractures is required if diplopia is there with entrapment of muscle or periorbital tissue, or if there is wide eye blowout fracture, that is a blowout fracture, the orbital fracture with intact orbital rim. In the orbital wall fractures, one can wait and watch. If there is no significant anophthalmos, that is less than 2 millimeters, there is no marked hypoglobus, no entrapment of extraocular muscles of tissue, or fracture is less than 50% of the orbital floor, or there is lack of diplopia. But you have to continuously monitor these cases. You can't leave the cases. You have to monitor. And then coming to the intraorbital foreign bodies, as I told you earlier also, you have to weigh the risk of removal versus risk of retention of the foreign body. Usually the posteriorly located foreign bodies are difficult to remove and can be left alone if they are inert. For splinters, as I told you, as seen in the armed forces scenario, they are mostly sterile and inert. They are easy to localize, but they are difficult to remove. Small non-organic foreign bodies may be left in the orbit. However, again, the retained foreign bodies need to be regularly followed up for early detection of any complications and have to be managed accordingly. And you have to remove foreign body the intra-orbital foreign body, if it is large or sharp-edged foreign body, if you have see the signs of infection, abscess or inflammation, if there is proptosis, restricted mobility, superficial palpable orbital foreign body, optic nerve compression is there is a suspicion of wood or vegetable matter, copper, steel, lead, iron foreign bodies need to be removed, and if there is fistula formation. So the summary of our protocol, and which is recommended worldwide also, is team evaluation for definitive protocol evolvement, and CT scan during initial assessment and follow-up. Nowadays the reconstruction CT of less than 1 millimeter is very useful and essential for assessing the type of damage, mode of damage, and for rational planning of the treatment and follow-up. The simultaneous surgical intervention by various teams as required basis, maybe neurosurgeon, oculoplastic surgeon, maxillofacial surgeon, general surgeon, laparoscopic surgeon. It is required from case to case. And last but not the least, one should remove the foreign body only after balancing the risk due to injury against improvement without any surgery. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Dhanwad. Very exhaustive and excellent presentation. Now we'll go on to Dr. Dhanashree Rathore, who has just come from giving a talk in the other session. She'll talk about pearls and managing posterior segment issues. She is senior consultant at Shankanetra SNS and needs no introduction. She is very active in all the conferences and has presented a lot of international and national papers.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Sham, for your kind invitation and for this kind introduction. So, I am going to talk to you about pearls in evaluation and management of posterior segment trauma. No financial disclosure. So, posterior segment evaluation sometimes might be easy in situations where, like this, where there is just one small injury in the periphery, mid-peripheral cornea, and most of the cornea is clear. So, you can just dilate the pupil and do a posterior segment evaluation. But sometimes there can be very serious and grievous injuries where the eye can be very badly injured. In this situation, the posterior segment evaluation will be difficult, and also it is not necessary required urgently. In fact, urgent repair of the globe and restoration of the integrity of the eyeball is most important. And in this situation, the posterior segment evaluation can wait and can be done later. Also in situations such as this, where the patient is very grievously injured, comatose, or small children, or where the eye is also very much massacred, facial trauma, it might be very difficult to evaluate the eye, and let alone evaluation of the posterior segment. That might be very difficult. So what we do in case of any globe trauma, first is to protect the ruptured eyeball with a rigid shield, avoid any pressure on the eyeball, and then preferably you can give some sedatives to children or anxiolytics to adults to make sure that you have a cooperative patient when you are examining these patient. Most important is to look at the relative afferent pupillary defect, and you must rule this out. Of course, perception of light also needs to be checked, but oftentimes in situations where patient is badly injured, sometimes the perception of light also might be difficult to check. So make sure that the RAPD is checked, and this has an implication on your prognosis. So assessment of the anterior segment is essential, but it is very easy, and you have to look at corneal injuries, or there can be some blast injuries, or infection also may be there. Posterior segment evaluation may be difficult, as I just mentioned, and imaging plays a huge role in this situation. Either X-ray, ultrasound, or CT scan can be done. X-ray is very easy and inexpensive and very easily available, so it can be done immediately. And it is very sensitive in detecting radio opaque foreign body, but otherwise it does not give much useful information. Ultrasound is also another tool which is easily available in the OPD and can be rapidly done. It is useful in evaluation of the foreign bodies as well as for retinal status. But it can have a small risk of extrusion of the intraocular contents if you are not very careful. CT scan is now very commonly done for all trauma patients to look at intraocular foreign bodies, fractures, and also the intraocular information. So these are the various situations where ultrasound can be useful in detecting retinal detachment or vitreous hemorrhage, foreign body, globe rupture, etc. And these are the CT scan images. So imaging can help you ascertain retinal status, posterior globe rupture, the vitreoretinal relationship, presence of IOFE, dislocated lens or choroidal detachment, and all this will help you in planning of your surgery, getting the required instruments ready before surgery, and also for prognostication. So you can inform the patient and the attender about the prognosis and how well it is going to go. So planning of treatment, even before you do the primary repair, you need to look at the vital signs or any associated non-ocular major injuries. In that situation, you have to, first precedence should be given to those injuries and that should be repaired. Eye injury, once you have seen that there is a open globe, then globe repair primary repair has to be done. If there is a doubt, you can do a CT scan or what I mentioned, imaging. If there is still uncertainty, you can do exploratory surgery. Occult globe rupture can be suspected if you have, if the patient has a vision of light perception of less, if there is a subconjunctival hemorrhage, chemosis and boggy conjunctiva, along with hyphema and low intraocular pressure. In this situation, you have to do exploratory surgery to locate the globe rupture and suture it. So what is the timing of vitrectomy? Whether it should be done at the time of primary repair? The advantage is that there is no fibrovascular proliferation and there is less chance of infection, but very often there is very poor visualization. The tissues are inflamed and edematous and very difficult to do surgery, and also you cannot assess the damage fully. The fibrovascular proliferation can cause problems such as peripheral tractional artery or posterior artery or even a cyclitic membrane. But however, the indications are that early vitrectomy you should perform for situations where there are grievous things such as endophthalmitis, toxic intraocular foreign body or retinal detachment. Late vitrectomy, that is within 3 to 14 days, is recommended for retinal detachment, lens or vitreous injury, vitreous hemorrhage, double perforating injury or intraocular foreign body. And very delayed vitrectomy, that is beyond 3 weeks, is done for pupillary membrane or dislocated lens, ghost cell glaucoma or retinal detachment with PVR, macular pucker, vitreous opacities, etc. So preoperative evaluation is important, that I mentioned assessment of light, consent, look at the associated injuries, and anterior segment evaluation is very important because your visualization of the surgery depends on that, and sometimes you may have to plan additional procedures such as penetrating keratoplasty or cataract surgery, etc. So the general principles of surgery, the sclerotomy planning is very important. The site of the sclerotomy should be at a safe distance from your repaired wound, as well as it should give you a good access to the posterior pole. Infusion cannula, you should avoid areas of choroidal detachment or the wound for placement of infusion cannula. A 6 mm infusion cannula or an AC maintainer might be required if the visualization is poor. Now this is one situation where there is suprachoroidal hemorrhage following injury, and I am actually using a 23 gauge MVR knife to give a sclerotomy, and you can see as soon as the sclerotomy is given, all this red fluid is coming out from the suprachoroidal space, and here I am actually fixing a 20 gauge infusion cannula, and I am doing a hybrid vitrectomy here, but this is a 6 mm cannula, and you can see I am locating the infusion cannula tip inside, and once the tip is seen, then you can proceed with vitrectomy. However, you can see that inside there is a total disorganization, and it is very difficult to see which is the vitreous membrane and which is the retina in this situation, and sometimes, so it is now I am taking the help of a chandelier, and with chandelier you can even do a bimanual surgery, and very carefully you may have to ascertain what is the tissue and then go ahead and dissect it. So I think okay, so at the end of these 2 hours you can see that some amount of retina has been salvaged, and it is now silicone oil is being used, laser and silicone oil. So intraocular foreign bodies form about 18% of posterior segment trauma. Imaging is very vital in this situation. Reactive foreign bodies like iron, copper can cause retinal degeneration due to siderosis and chalcosis, and they require removal. Non-reactive foreign bodies such as glass or plastic may cause mechanical damage, but they may be left behind if you think that they are not causing damage. Vegetative foreign bodies can cause infection and again require removal. So considerations for foreign body removal are the location, whether it is intravitreal or on the retina or subretinal, whether they are magnetic or non-magnetic, and whether the route of removal would be anterior or posterior or behind the globe. So this is a kind of algorithm for removal of foreign body. Maybe I'll just quickly walk you through this. So if the foreign body is in the vitreous, then remove the vitreous and then use either a magnet or a foreign body forceps. A foreign body less than 5 millimeters you can remove by enlarging the sclerotomy. A larger foreign body has to be removed through limbal route. If the foreign body is on the retinal surface, the capsule has to be cut with an MVR knife, and then you can tease the foreign body out of the capsule and again use the forceps or the magnet. If there is any retinal hole surrounding the foreign body, then that needs to be laser first. And if you have foreign body which is subretinal or behind in the ocular coats, then it is better to go from the external route and remove the foreign body, but you may have to put a buckle at that area. Suprachoroidal hemorrhage is again one very important part of trauma. I will not go into the details because that will be prolonging the talk too much, but a 2-week interval is generally given for liquefaction of the blood. Systemic steroids are very important, and then you have to perform vitrectomy and settle the retina. Post-traumatic endophthalmitis is again a very entire big talk. So about 3.4% of open globe injuries will end up with traumatic endophthalmitis, and risk factors are delayed primary repair, that is more than 24 hours, presence of foreign body, ruptured lens capsule, they can lead to traumatic endophthalmitis. It requires early intervention, and prognosis can be poor if there is generally it is a gram-negative infection in trauma, and the prognosis can be very poor. One word about no light perception eyes. There are several eyes which can present with no light perception. So you must rule out these 3 things before you consider intervention. One is optic nerve avulsion, optic nerve transection, and profound loss of intraocular contents. If these 3 things are there, then you do not touch these eyes because these are unsalvageable. You may just do the repair and leave it, but nothing further can be done. But sometimes the light perception may be erroneously recorded because children or patients who are impaired cognitive state or under the influence of alcohol, or if there is a dense hyphema or vitreous hemorrhage, choroidal hemorrhage and retinal detachment, sometimes the perception of light may not be properly recorded. So you can go ahead with surgery in these situations. And there is some authors have reported some good improvement in these no light perception eyes, but however you have to be very cautious, and case by case you need to decide. Can also take the help of a VEP preoperatively to decide. So the key points is it's important to check whether there is a presence of relative afferent pupillary defect. Sometimes reverse RAPD can be checked in the contralateral eye. You suspect occult globe rupture if the eye has only light perception and conjunctival ecchymosis, hypotony and hyphema. Urgent repair of the open globe takes precedence over orbital or adnexal injuries. So take home message that this traumatic situation is less than ideal situation with many challenges, and you may have to improvise during surgery and have to be ready with plan B. Expect the worst. Always try to salvage the globe and don't do any primary evisceration, even in a very badly disfigured globe. Best time to intervene for retinal surgery is 10 to 15 days following trauma, and there can be varied outcomes, but sometimes useful vision can be salvaged. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Very nice talk. Thank you so much. Paucity of time. I'll ask Professor Gupta to give the last talk, preventive and medical legal aspect of trauma. Let's say this.
Friends, I will be speaking on this last aspect, preventive aspects and medico-legal aspects of ocular trauma. No financial interest. Well, I dedicate this presentation to my mentor, Padam Bhushan Dr. S.S. Badrinath sir, from whom I learned A to Z of ocular trauma. Actually, in 1987 to 1990, we were getting injuries of Indian peacekeeping force soldiers in Sri Lanka, and I got 169 cases from these IPKF injuries. So after initial treatment, many of the cases which were complicated, I used to take to Dr. Badrinath sir, and he has treated at top priority, and at the same time he taught me the pearls in managing posterior segment injury, which Dr. Dhansri has just told. So this great man has done a lot of work for armed forces, so hats off to this man. Unluckily, we lost him recently on 21st November 23. And ocular trauma preventive aspects I will be dealing under these 8 heads. First is occupational eye injuries, which constitute 1/3 of all eye injuries, and activity like grinding, hammering, welding, drilling, cutting metal, they causes these injuries: conjunctival, corneal, foreign body, arc injury, chemical injuries, penetrating injuries, intraocular foreign body, electric shock. The preventive aspect for this is we should have a eye wear protection in form of safety goggles or glasses or welding helmets. For chemical injuries, we should have eye washing stations at the site of the occupation itself. Other common cause for is motor vehicle accidents. So prevention for that, there is a seat belt legislation, and laminated windscreen has reduced injury to great extent. But frontal airbag deployment has prevented life-threatening injuries, but on the other hand, it has increased the eye injuries like corneal abrasion and traumatic macular edema. Sports injuries are 90% sports injuries are preventable, and particularly so the sports in which there is a use of racket, bats, ball, they cause severe injury, and very high risk injuries are there in boxing, wrestling, contact martial arts. Well, those athletes or persons taking parts in sports, we must see that if these persons are having myopia or aphakia, we must screen them, because these are the persons who are likely to have the retinal detachment with sports injury. For sports, we should have protective device. The protective device is made of polycarbonate material. This polycarbonate material is 8 times stronger than the normal plastic material, and it is capable of absorbing UVA as well as UVB rays. This is available as prescription lenses also. In low risk sports, we take 2 millimeter polycarbonate glasses. In moderate to high, 3 millimeter thick polycarbonate lenses. Those who are having refractory errors, there the prescription polycarbonate lens glasses should be used, and we should have a sturdy sports having impact resistance. In sports like cricket, hockey and baseball, we should have a face mask attached to a helmet. Ocular VAR injury, 15 to 25% are bilateral, and in Sri Lanka, which I got about 169 cases, most of the injuries were blast injuries, because the Tamil Tigers, they were using internal explosive devices, and due to that blast injuries become. These blast injuries can have effect due to the primary effect, secondary effect due to the fragments they are carried away and they go to the eye. As you see in this case, the hundreds of foreign bodies are impregnated over the cornea. Tertiary, because when blast occurs, the eye gets against the orbital wall, struck against the orbital wall, and then the structures of the orbits are damaged. Or fourthly, from the burns. In bombing injury, we can have missile fragments injury, or the small fragments of mortar, cement can be there. Well, the earlier speaker, Brigadier Vinod Agarwal, my friend, who has enough experience of Kargil warfare in 1999, he recommends that there should be a helmet fitted with 4 millimeter thick polycarbonate glasses. Because in war, we require to come with great force, the injury occurs. So that is why this 4 millimeter thick polycarbonate glasses should be there along with the helmet. It will prevent small fragment to enter eye, it will prevent from mine blast injury, and it will be able to reduce eye injuries to great extent. In fireworks, injuries occur at home places, mostly in children. So particularly the malfunctioning fireworks, we should not try to reignite, they are the cause of the injuries. In domestic setup, the women and children, they are prey to domestic violence, they can get injury. Children can get injury due to so many sharp household articles. Domestic accidents involving chemicals also do occur. When chemicals are there, we should not run for another thing. Whatever is available at home, even the irrigation with water is good enough with clean water. So immediately we should irrigate for irritating chemicals 5 minutes, but if there is a severe irritant or 4 acids for 20 minutes wash we should give. And in alkali, hydrochloric acid and phenol, we should give 60-minute wash because they are the most dangerous. And not only, even with 60-minute wash, still if it is there, it may require rewash even also. Of course, in hospital setup we can have wash with ringer lactate or isotonic saline, but otherwise at home when it occurs, we should give with clean water. Pediatric injuries, they occur because children have got immature motor skills and they have curiosity to do the things, so immediately injuries occur. They can fall against wall, they can fight among each other, and playing bow and arrow is another cause of injury. So we should provide children at all times, and the pencil, knives, they should be kept away from the children. We should avoid danger games of throwing objects, playing with guns, lighting fireworks. Bow and arrow injuries, they were when this Ramayana serial was there by Ramanand Sagar in 86-7. I remember there were a lot of injuries, and Shankar Netralaya got so many injuries to the extent Dr. Badrinath said that this serial should be stopped. There was tremendous bow and arrow injury because every children they started playing with bow and arrow at their home. They started causing injury. So that should not be permitted to go as far as possible. Safety goggles should be provided to children who engage in sports. In old age, injury occurs generally due to falls, or the person may be having hypertension, dementia, so they can fall, so that injuries can occur. Of course, injury can occur due to if the bathrooms are slippery, so we should make a rough floor. Now I come to the medico-legal aspects of the injury. The medico-legal aspects, medico-legal negligence or professional negligence is under these two heads I will be telling. When a case of ocular trauma comes to a medical officer, he must do all details, name of the patient, name of the inspector who is along with the injury. So all reports should be there. In medical legal report, it should be written, and anything doing written and informed consent should be there from the individual. And the police must also be informed. If there is one doesn't comply with any of the above, then negligence may be filed against him in the court of the law. Negligence, professional negligence can be due to, there can be absence of a reasonable skill. As a rule, a MBBS should have such much knowledge for managing, a MS should have such much knowledge for managing, and if he is MCH, he should have such knowledge. So that reasonable skill must be there. If the person does not have the reasonable skill according to his qualification and all, that is also medically questionable. If there is a willful negligence either in the act of commission, suppose if one was to operate right eye and has operated left eye, this is an act of commission, wrong act of commission, so he is again liable for medical legal. Act of omission, certain things one is supposed to do but one doesn't do. As Vinod Verma said, tetanus prophylaxis. If tetanus prophylaxis is not done, so that one was supposed to do, so that becomes act of omission. So that is also questionable. In cases of injuries also, as Sri Ratra has also told, if it is delayed for more than 24 hours, it can cause endophthalmitis. So you have delayed, you have omitted that time or you delayed it, so again you are liable to medical legal because you have delayed and then endophthalmitis is occurred. Well, against negligence we should, to avoid, we should not criticize our fellow doctor, we should have good medical record. We should manage the complication which occurs well, and as well as we should inform the complication. If any nucleus drop has occurred, then it is not that we should not hide. Any IOL drop has occurred, we must manage it, and at the same time we must inform it also, because this complication is likely to occur, so it has occurred. But to hide it, it is a medico-legally questionable. Medico-legal for compensation is also there, because any person who gets injured, he has to take time off. He will be spending on the treatment also. So in India we have got Workmen Compensation Act of 1923, which has been modified many times afterwards, and Motor Vehicle Act is there. But employer is not liable to pay for compensation if the disability is less than 3 days, or if the person who was working, he was under the influence of alcohol, or he or she has not obeyed the rule which has been laid by the employer. So their compensation will not be there. Amount of compensation depends upon the disablement. If there is a loss of vision in one eye, then there is a 10% disablement. If loss of vision, complete loss of vision in one eye, there is a 30% disablement. And if there is, along with that, there is a disfigurement, then 40%. And if there is a complete loss of vision in both eyes, then there is a 100% disablement. And according to disablement, compensation is there. For compensation, there must be a notice which must be given to the employer within 7 days. And claim must be put within 2 years. Even to the commissioner, claim must go within 2 years of the injury occurred. The application for claim must accompany the statement of circumstances, date of the service of notice to employer, which should be given within 7 days, and name and address of the parties. So, thank you, brothers, for listening.
Thank you, Professor. Very informative talk. Thank you so much. And we have come to the end of our session. We'll just call the speakers on stage. We'll have all of, we'll have a group photo. Please.